Good afternoon, good people. And what's up to the rest of y'all? My name's Chris. This is Twin Crossings. This is going to be a channel that in the future will turn more towards a lifestyle of sailing and the things that it takes to be prepared for that. But as of right now, this is strictly philosophical. There's sailing school on the horizon. There's been plenty of study, a whole lot of study. And there's a reason behind it all. And finding that reason is the most important part of going through with any dream. And so, to crystallize all of that, I decided to put it down in a short essay. And I titled that essay, A Lesson in Resilience Deferred. And it starts something like this. I was 10 years old the first time I chose to be alone. Not the alonest that finds a boy, the kind that's visited upon him by a father's death or a mother's leaving, but the kind that a boy goes looking for on purpose, long after that loss had passed. I'd buried my father that year, and at 9 years old, already I understood that the world doesn't consult a child before taking something that's essential to him. At 10, I had built a shell of a dinghy, a plywood Pearson minute boat, with my uncle, and I was never capable of making the final touches. I pleaded with my stepfather to help me finish it, but just couldn't get it over the finish line. I sat in a yard rotting by degrees for longer than I cared to say, a small wooden argument for a life that I was told by every reasonable voice around me that I could not yet have. I did not know, watching it grow gray and soft in the weather, that I was only postponing the launch. The boat was not mine alone, but a physical manifestation of those holding me to the ground, not by malice, but because their own adventurous spark had already been doused. The boat sat instead, and something in me sat with it. A small wooden proof that wanting something so badly that you're willing to build it with your own two hands is no guarantee that you'll be permitted to use it. So I saved what I could, and through the goodwill of my family, I was able to get a kayak underneath me, and with it, an avenue for adventure. So I went and found a river with no one on it, and I stayed there until I felt like a person again. It was, I would only understand much later, the first and smallest version of everything that I would go on to do with my life. When the ground gives way, you build something that floats, and you get on it. I spent the years that followed making a set of armor around myself through weight rooms, wrestling mats, gloved hands, and impromptu schoolyard fight cards. To those on the outside, it was just a young man's drive to prove his prowess. To me, it was callousing that fresh wound the deterioration of brain cancer causes a man. Through creation of a particular armor a boy builds when he's tired of being pitied for a childhood that fell apart before he was old enough to defend it. When competition brought no gratification, and hours spent on vanity brought no peace, I found that way out of my mind the way that most young men do, through drugs, through nights that had no purpose but drinks and shallow interactions, until the state took the one thing I had left, my freedom. Put in a cell to think about what I had built other than a life. What I decided in that cell was simple enough to fit on a card. Become an asset or remain a liability. There is no third option worth having. I came out to a world where I would soon to be a father and to face a choice whether or not to take on the life of a tradesman and still remaining one by choice today, because a man who has run out of hard things to do has not yet met this world. I thought that was the hardest thing I would ever choose. I was wrong. My father's death had sent a 9-year-old boy looking for nature's wrath to prove that his body could survive anything or put me out of my misery should I find myself incapable. Upon entering my second decade of life, facing the birth of my son, a beautiful boy, put into a body whose brain would not give him the future either of us had assumed. It had sent a burgeoning man looking for something rivers and dojos were incapable of providing. Physical resilience I had already built. I had built it brick by brick since I was 10. What I needed now was another kind. The mental and spiritual resilience it takes to build a life for a child on ground no one can promise you, and to do it without walls and without armor, because armor cannot rock a boy to sleep, or to teach the daughters that would follow what living by principle costs. My father's death made me hard. My son's my son's life made me a father in earnest. My daughter's a modeling of what being worthy of love looks like, which requires, I have learned, considerably more courage than any river. I did not know that 20 years of pipe and brick, steel and rope, mud and water would be the price of that crossing, paid in advance, one job at a time, until a man who had once been a boy with a boat that he wasn't allowed to sail found himself, finally, in possession of both the vessel and the permission. So we can look at that. We can look at that in a couple of ways. Is the place that we come from something that we can look fondly back upon as being a reason for who you are today, or is it something to look back upon negatively and say this is why I couldn't achieve what I wanted to achieve? You know, I know at 10 it's a tall order to say, you know, but if I'd have really been passionate about it and would have really had that work ethic at that time period, I could have fiberglassed that boat. I could have fucking figured it out. It probably would have taken 2, 3 tries, you know, get the whole boat done, realize that I got voids in the gel coat, sand it all back down and start again. You know, but I was lacking. I was lacking in that hard work and then that that ethic of when you say you're going to do something, you do it. You know? And so I fell off. I fell off hard, man. I was 16 years old. You know, fucking eating 10 hits of acid the night before school, and then hopping on the bus when I'm still mid trip and going to school. You know, I made all those choices. I made some stupid choices. And when that put me in jail, and I had to decide, who am I going to be? Am I going to follow the the footsteps of the people that came before me that left these voids and pass that on to the next person? Or am I going to radically change everything about who I am? And I did that. I got out of jail. It wasn't a long time, man. I spent 3 months in there for pot. It's nothing to brag about. But it showed me how valuable freedom is. And here I am. You know, I was 18. I'm 31 now, man. That's 13 years. You know, for the last 13 years, I've been doing trade work. You know, started out at a ranch, working horses, cleaning fields, barns, bush hogging. Doing the nine, teaching little kids how to ride horses. Uh, After that, I moved into bricklaying, laid brick for a summer, back bricking work, man. No equipment, mixing it all in a wheelbarrow with a hoe. Uh, and then, I realized, like, some trades, they don't pay off. They pay off in knowledge and the ability to be self sufficient, but there's no upward mobility. It's not a corporate life. And so I had to find a trade that, you know, the regular man, the journeyman, he could make a good living. And that's when I started plumbing. So I've been plumbing for 12 years now. And it's been great. It's been awesome, man. Like, I've learned a lot about construction, you know, and in that time period, I've used that knowledge, to improve my ability to design and spend a little time going to school for drafting so I could learn how to use AutoCAD and, designing houses and cars on graph paper since I was a little kid. Uh, but in this land life, I realized that there's a lot of playing the game that it requires to be a successful person. There are no handshake deals anymore on I'm a working man, I'm going to provide for my family, give me a fucking mortgage, and let me have a house. You know, I'll maintain it. I'll pay the damn bank because I don't want to be homeless. Spend some time homeless, not fun. You know, you try living in the woods in Louisiana in August in a hammock. It's a interesting life. Uh, that'll be a story for another time, man. That was a crazy time, and so I've done well enough. I can provide for a family of five, being a plumber, man. And at a certain point, when you have a child with disabilities, the funding starts drying up. The the school doesn't put in the same effort to give your child that attention that they used to. When you're dealing with a 65-pound, almost 5 foot tall 10-year-old that still wears diapers and eats through a feeding tube. You know, it can be a little difficult for a lady that works at a public school to deal with day in and day out. And I understand. You know, so as he gets older and as he gets bigger, the people that are going to be available to do stuff with him are going to become less and less. And as I get older, that ability and that strength and drive to continually improve the quality of his life is going to diminish as well. I mean, that's just the entropy of time. There's nothing that you can do to slow down that process. You know, how hard you try, man. Hopefully, 10 years from now, there'll be some guy sitting on the Joe Rogan Experience that's talking about, hey, man, we done figured out how to lengthen your telomere so far that if you're under 40, you can live as long as you want to. But that shit ain't happened yet. So I'm faced with a choice, you know, and that choice is to keep plodding along, man. Maybe I can put my pride to the side and I can work inside that system and I can run a plumbing company, buy a house, be all happy hunky dory. Or we can do that hard work. We can make that dream happen. You know, we can go down the path of building that boat. You know, put the finishing touches on that fucking dinghy and get out there on the water, man. You know, there's a world of nice boats, really nice boats that don't cost a lot of money. They need work. They need somebody that's got the skills, and they got these things that they ain't afraid to hurt. Like the calluses on these things and the scars on these fucking hands, man. Like, I'm surprised I still got all my digits. Uh, so that's what this channel is going to be about. You know, my wife and I, we recently enrolled in an ASA sailing school. We're going to go take the 101 course. Uh, I've been researching and studying everything that I can about this life for months now, man. And when I look around at the world of content creators that are in the sailing community, man, I don't see a lot of people that look like me. You know, there's there's a couple guys. There's a lot of them that I respect. But there's a very general background and way that people come about doing this. I don't want to be a retiree that's spending my sunsets chasing sunsets. You know, I want to get my children out there. I want my kids to see a side of the world that we don't get to see here in America. You know, there's a lot of doom and fear porn on all these social media and news sites, man. It's just like it's amazing if the 10% of what they tell us is true. I don't understand how the world's functioning at this point. You know, but then you hear from guys that are out there and guys that have been doing this shit for 10, 15, 20 years, and man, it looks amazing. You know, if we're gonna have to work hard and I'm gonna have to work hard at home, I would rather work hard and have some adventure. So that's the goal. I'm gonna start with these essays and building a website. Got the YouTube channel going. I made an Instagram for it, and we're gonna start out with the things to study, where to look, who's a good, reputable expert in this that's going to steer you in the right path, not somebody that's, got a brokerage company that's trying to say, hey, well, this Ericsson 37, this is a good boat, and then they just so happen to have an Ericsson 37 for sale at the marina that they work at. So, we're going to go down that path. We're going to talk about all these different boats, the type of ship, versus the type of cruising that you want to do. If you just want to be, take a month off from work in the wintertime and sail to the Bahamas, they got boats for that. If you want to live on board full time and circumnavigate, they got boats for that. We're going to talk about it. I'm going to make some cool art. Like, I don't know if you see my, I got a Greg Overton print right there. Got some, some real nice Art Deco, Atomic Age artwork. My whole house, man, is filled with art. I love making art. I like taste making. There's a whole lot of slop in this world, and not a lot of people put a lot of effort into how it's perceived, and they just chase virality. It's not about virality, man. It's about making a statement and art and a lifestyle that stands the test of time. You know, Nobody looks back on the good, the bad, and the ugly and says, "Man, this is actually a shitty movie." Now that I rewatched it, you go rewatch that, and you're like, "Damn, Clint Eastwood was a dog." And but that's about it, man. I just want to introduce myself and what we got going on. I got pages and pages and pages of notes written out. I just got to condense it into a narrative. A narrative that some guy that's following 6 months behind me, he could take it from somebody that's not an expert, but somebody that's trying to figure it out too. I want to talk to guys like Be the Captain, like you know, SV Tritea, the Sailor John, you know, the Practical Sailor. I want to talk to those guys. I want to see what they say. You know, am I living in a fantasy world? Or is it capable of using these personal skills, using my people skills, using technology for what we have available to us to make money? You know, is this life attainable for a regular person, man? To just eject yourself from the rat race for a little while. Shit, if it don't work out, I spent 3 years doing something incredible. My kids got to see a lot of cool shit, and I'll just go back to plumbing. I could start over with a new set of shit. You know? But I hope to hear from you guys, man. You can find me at Twin Crossings on Instagram. You can find my personal page, just Chris Creel, and yeah, man, we're gonna keep doing it. We gonna work on it. I'm gonna learn all this, editing software, just like I've learned everything else that I've had to figure out in my life. I ain't got the money to pay somebody to do it for me, so I'm gonna figure it out. But peace.